You know that feeling when you open your banking app and for a second you brace yourself before the number loads? Like you already know it's going to be lower than it should be. And the crazy part? You didn't even do anything reckless. You just lived like a normal person. Groceries, gas, rent, the electric bill that somehow went up again. You didn't book a vacation. You didn't splurge on anything wild. You just existed for another month, and somehow that cost more than you thought it would. That's where a lot of people are right now. And it's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's not that you're bad with money. It's that the math genuinely stopped working the way it used to. And today, I want to talk about that. Not in a, here are 11 tips to cut expenses kind of way, because honestly, you've seen that video. What I want to do is actually make sense of what's happening, why saving feels so much harder than it used to, and what you can actually do about it that doesn't require you to live like you're preparing for some kind of apocalypse. The first thing I want to get out of the way is this idea that saving money is simple and people just don't have the discipline for it. You've probably heard some version of the just spend less than you earn advice at some point in your life. And I mean, technically, that's true. But it's the kind of truth that completely ignores reality. Telling someone to just spend less when rent has gone up 30% in 3 years, when groceries cost noticeably more than they did 2 years ago, when interest rates on car loans have nearly doubled, that's not advice. That's just noise. Here's what I think is actually going on, and it's something a lot of personal finance content doesn't address honestly. For many people, especially in the last few years, saving has become structurally harder. Not because they changed, because the environment changed around them. There's a concept in behavioral economics called the money illusion, the tendency to think about money in terms of its face value rather than its actual purchasing power. In other words, you might be earning more than you were 3 years ago, but if prices have risen faster than your income, you're actually worse off. And your brain doesn't naturally account for that. So you feel like you should be saving because you're making more than you used to. But the money disappears faster, and you end up feeling like you're failing, when really, the game changed while you were playing it. That matters, because when we misdiagnose the problem, when we treat a structural issue like a personal failing, we end up solving for the wrong thing. We guilt ourselves into extreme budgets that don't last. We cut things that actually matter to our well-being. And then, when it doesn't work, we feel worse. So let's start from the right place. The reason saving feels so hard right now isn't one thing. It's a few things happening at the same time. And they compound on each other in a way that's genuinely exhausting. The most obvious one is inflation. And I know that word gets thrown around constantly now, but what it actually means in your day-to-day life is that the same basket of things you bought 2 years ago costs meaningfully more today. Food is the most visible one for most people. You go to the same supermarket, buy roughly the same things, and the total at the checkout is just higher. Not because you bought more, because everything is more. But inflation isn't uniform. Some things went up more than others. housing costs and rent went up sharply in most places. Car prices went up. Insurance, both health and auto, went up in ways that most people didn't see coming. Meanwhile, things like electronics sometimes got cheaper. So depending on where your money actually goes each month, you might have been hit harder than someone else, even if official inflation numbers make it seem like it wasn't that bad. Then there's the second thing, which is subtler: the way companies have responded to inflation. There's actually a term called shrinkflation, which is when a product stays the same price but gets physically smaller. The bag of chips that was 400 grams is now 340. The cereal box looks the same, but you're getting less. The subscription that was $9.99 is now $13.99. These things individually feel small, but they're happening across dozens of products and services at the same time. And the cumulative effect is that your money is just doing less than it used to. And then there's the third thing, which almost nobody talks about enough: the psychological tax of all of this. When money feels tight, your brain shifts into a scarcity mindset. There's actual research on this. Work done by economists Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, showing that when people feel financially stressed, a significant portion of their cognitive bandwidth gets consumed by that stress. You're not thinking as clearly about long-term decisions. You're more reactive. You're more susceptible to small, impulsive purchases that offer immediate relief from the anxiety. And then you feel worse afterward, which keeps the cycle going. So when someone is struggling to save and they say, "I don't know where the money goes," it's not always just careless spending. Sometimes it's that stress is literally impairing financial judgment. And no budget template addresses that. This is why I think the conversation about saving money has to start with understanding, not with restriction. Now, let's talk about what actually helps. Here's the shift I want to offer, and it's not the one most people expect. Most people approach saving as subtraction. You look at what you spend, you find things to cut, you subtract them, and whatever's left is your savings. And that can work, but it has a real problem. It positions saving as deprivation. Every dollar you save is something you didn't get to enjoy. And psychologically, that framing is exhausting to sustain. The shift is to think about saving as protection first. Not protection in a doom and gloom way, but protection in the sense that a small financial cushion fundamentally changes how you experience your life. When you have even a modest buffer, a few $100s set aside that you don't touch, your relationship with money stress changes. Not because you're rich, not because you've solved anything, but because you have options. Small ones, but options. There's research in behavioral psychology that shows people who have even a small emergency fund report significantly lower levels of financial anxiety than people with similar incomes who don't. The actual number in the account matters less than the existence of it. The feeling of having something there changes how you move through your days. So the reframe isn't save more, it's build a buffer first, even a small one, because that changes the psychology, which changes the behavior, which over time builds into something real. The second mindset shift is about the difference between fixed and variable expenses. Most people, when they try to save money, Go after the fun stuff first. The subscriptions, the coffee, the dinners out. And those things do add up. But for a lot of people, the much bigger issue is the fixed costs that feel unchangeable. Rent, car payments, insurance, debt repayments. These are the ones that quietly consume the majority of the paycheck before there's any discretionary spending at all. And the honest truth is, these are harder to change, but not impossible. And often, a single change in a fixed cost, refinancing something, finding a cheaper insurance plan, renegotiating a bill, can free up more money per month than cutting every coffee for a year. The math is just better on big fixed items than on small variable ones. And yet, we almost never look there because they feel permanent. So what does this actually look like in practice? The first thing I'd suggest is doing what I think of as an honest monthly accounting. Not a budget, just an accounting. Go through last month's bank and card statements and sort everything into 3 columns. Things you need: rent, food, utilities, debt payments. Things you chose and genuinely valued: a meal you loved, a subscription you actually use. And things you spent money on that you honestly can't remember or don't care about. That third column is the real one. Not because you need to eliminate it entirely, but because it's where unconscious spending lives. And the goal isn't to feel guilty about it, it's to just see it clearly. Maybe for the first time. Once you can see it, you make deliberate choices instead of default ones. That distinction matters more than the dollar amount. The second thing is the buffer. If you don't have one, start with an amount so small it feels almost pointless. I'm serious. If the idea of saving $500 feels impossible right now, start with $20 a month into a separate account you don't look at. The point isn't the number. The point is building the habit of treating saving as a non-negotiable, even in a small form, before everything else takes it. Then, over time, you try to increase it. Not dramatically, just gradually. The same way compound interest works on investments, the habit of saving compounds on itself. Third, and this is the one that feels least like personal finance advice, but might be the most important. Think about your income to fixed cost ratio. If your fixed costs are above 60 to 65% of your take-home pay, saving becomes almost structurally impossible, regardless of discipline. That's not a moral failure. That's just the math. And when the math doesn't work, cutting small expenses rarely fixes it. What fixes it is either increasing income, decreasing a major fixed cost, or both. I know that sounds simple when I say it. I know the actual doing of it is complicated. But naming the real problem clearly is the first step towards solving the right thing. And finally, don't try to fix everything at once. The financial content world loves dramatic transformations. The person who cut their expenses in half and saved their first $10,000 in 6 months. And those stories are real, but they're not the norm. The norm is small, steady, unsexy progress. And that's okay. The person who saves $50 more per month consistently for years ends up in a genuinely different place than the person who goes hard for 1 month and burns out. I want to leave you with this. If saving money feels hard right now, there's a real chance it's because it actually is hard right now. Not because you're weak, not because you don't care, but because the economic environment of the last few years has been genuinely difficult for the average person in a way that a lot of mainstream financial advice hasn't caught up to yet. And the answer to that isn't to feel worse about yourself. It's to understand the system you're operating in, adjust what you can realistically adjust, and give yourself credit for the fact that you're thinking about this at all. Money, at its core, is just a resource. And like any resource, the goal isn't to hoard it or fear it. The goal is to use it in ways that give your life more stability, more freedom, more quiet. You don't need to be perfect at this. You just need to be slightly more intentional than you were yesterday. And over time, that's genuinely enough. If this helped you in any way, I hope you leave a like. It genuinely means a lot. Maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more of this type of content, feel free to subscribe. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.